afternoon and welcome to Illinois Lawmakers live coverage of Governor J.B. Pritzker's first State of the State and budget message to a joint session of the Illinois General Assembly. Hello, I'm Jak Tichenor, along with Capital Facts publisher Rich Miller and Chicago Tonight correspondent Amanda Vinicky from WTTW. We're live here in the Speaker's Gallery, and as you can hear, a round of applause as Speaker Madigan begins introducing the various dignitaries who are gathered here for this historic speech for Governor Pritzker, a combined State of the State and budget message. Rich, what is your thinking on why he's decided to tie the two messages together today?
I think that in the past, when they've done a State of the State address, governors, people have always said, well, what about the budget, man? And the budget is our biggest issue, as it always is. So I think combining them, he did his speech when he was sworn into office. So I think combining them was fine. And, you know, it's fun.
In our time here, Amanda, we've seen a couple of these. It's been done before, and I think when you look at the magnitude of the job that Governor Pritzker's taking over and some of the challenges that await, I'm sure that the month or so of lead time to work through the budget and everything else is probably also a big part of this.
Yeah, you need time to figure this out. We're talking billions of dollars, and no matter what, I mean, I obviously have never been governor, but one of the rubs is that there's nothing that can really prepare you for that. I believe former Governor Jim Edgar, who had served as Secretary of State, been in government for really his entire adult life, when he became governor, he said he still didn't have any sort of prep for that. So yes, there's lead time that is necessary to do all the preparations for getting this in order and to figure out where things are at. I do expect that a lot of this speech is going to be Governor J.B. Pritzker putting blame on his predecessor for what he's going to say are the tough things he'll have to do.
And there's been some of that in the days leading up to this speech.
Yeah.
He's had the Ronner Wreckage Report, where he builds the case that the state of Illinois is going to have a $3.2 billion budget deficit going into year 2020.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly handed the greatest inheritance. Of course,
Neither was Ronner, for that matter.
That's what I was just about to say. Bruce Ronner took office. The tax increase had partly rolled back. So, Quinn gets sworn in. It's a horrible budget situation for years. Blagojevich came in. The first thing he complained about, if you'll recall, was the pensions, the massive pension payments that he had to make. So, yeah, we've had a long run of really bad fiscal news, and I would really like somebody to actually solve these problems, but it's a lot of money. It takes a lot of money to solve the kind of problems that we have.
It's a problem that goes back a good 20 years. If you look at certain reports, we've had a structural deficit since the late 1990s. A big round of applause right now here in the House chambers as the new governor of the state of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, makes his way into the House chambers, making his way down the center aisle of the Illinois House, escorted by members of the House and Senate, the executive party, making its way to the dais here. All in all, of course, we know that part of what he's been doing in the last few days, as he's been talking about the budget deficit, is building momentum toward a progressive income tax in 2020.
This speech is designed to be a pivot toward the progressive income tax in 2 years. This is all he's trying to do, he's going to say, for the next 2 budget years, is just to get us through until a progressive income tax is passed. It remains to be seen whether he can do that, by the way.
That's going to be a heavy lift because it's got to clear both the House and the Senate. Then it's got to clear the voters of Illinois in 2020.
And already we're seeing, quote-unquote, dark money, and that means money that does not have to be disclosed, who these donors, who the contributors are, beginning to fight that battle out. So if you think, oh gosh, definitely on both sides. So if you think that we're sick of an election, we're going to be done, no. Not only do you have the 2020 presidential, but this is going to be a huge battle.
Well, Speaker Madigan, President Cullerton, Leader Durkin, Leader Brady, Lieutenant Governor Stratton, Attorney General Raoul, Secretary White, Comptroller Mendoza, Treasurer Frericks, members of the General Assembly, honored guests and citizens, and the extraordinary First Lady of Illinois, my wife, MK. Thank you all for your very warm welcome. I ask that we begin today by taking a moment to grieve with our neighbors in Aurora over the grave tragedy that occurred less than a week ago. 5 good people killed in an evil act of workplace violence. 5 police officers who were injured when they ran into gunfire. As I said Friday when I visited Aurora, may the memory of those that we lost be a blessing. May their memory fuel our work to bring peace to our state. And may God bless the brave law enforcement officers who continue to run toward danger. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Every one of us who serves in public office becomes a student of history. So few people have held these jobs. We must allow the experiences of those who came before us to help shape what lies ahead. Every year, the governor of Illinois is required to provide the General Assembly with a proposed budget and an update on the condition of our state. It's a tradition in true keeping with our democracy and a task that requires humble honesty and some bold optimism. Today, I offer that proposal and report with an eye toward our shared history and our hopes for the future. Illinois' 200-year history is a web of recurring challenges, the same themes recycling with each new decade. Indeed, when reviewing past reports to the General Assembly by previous governors, the same problems are raised over and over again. There's not enough money to address social ills, not enough jobs to employ people, not enough resources to adequately maintain and build our infrastructure, and not enough attention to the plight of working families. It may not surprise you to learn that these problems existed in 1819. They existed in 1919, and they exist today in 2019. History can be a cruel exercise in pessimism if you narrow your gaze. But if you widen your vision just a little bit, you will see that the recurring reports from the past have been occasionally dotted with unapologetic optimists who focused on tackling old problems with new ideas and new vigor, reducing the burden for each generation along the way. One of those unapologetic optimists was Governor Henry Horner, who took office in 1933. It puts the current day in honest perspective to think about the challenges that Horner faced. The Great Depression had just begun. Nearly half of Illinois' workforce was unemployed. Hungry workers were marching on Springfield. Teachers had not received a paycheck in nearly a year. Labor disputes were ending in bloodshed. Banks were shuttering. And to add to it all, floods were sweeping across big swaths of our state. Nevertheless, with the daunting nature of the state's condition, Horner approached his job with optimism, with wit, and with a dogged work ethic. In a speech soon after he took office, he said, "We have got to hurdle a few more obstacles before we're on the broad highway of return to normal conditions. However, the road is clearly in sight." Today, that is where we find ourselves again. The road to normal conditions is in sight. However, to get there, we must begin with an honest accounting of the struggles of the last few years and the challenges left behind. Illinois is faced with a $3.2 billion budget deficit and a $15 billion debt from unpaid bills. Last year alone, the state paid out more than $700 million in late payment penalties. That's enough to cover a free 4-year university tuition for more than 12,000 students. We're dealing with a fundamental structural deficit that has existed for quite some time and spanned the administrations of several governors. And it won't be solved until we rethink our spending priorities and some basic revenue issues facing the state. During a time of unprecedented economic growth across the country, we lost 4 valuable years because of an ideological battle. That stops now. Budgeting will not be done anymore by taking the state hostage or by court orders, consent decrees, and continuing appropriations, but instead by debate and compromise and a return to regular order. We will work together earnestly to solve the state's problems. We will disagree at times on important things, but the work we all came here to do will get done. To that end, the budget I present to you today is an honest proposal. The costs are not hidden. The revenues I propose are not out of reach. The hole we need to fill is not ignored. There's no fantasy line item called working together or executive management. Instead, this budget proposal reflects some of my most deeply held values and the hopes of voters who sent us here, but tempered by the knowledge that we must hold the line on spending in the context of the revenue available and the diminished condition of our state government. Undoubtedly, all of you will bring your own priorities, ideas, and concerns to the budget process. I welcome that conversation. That's as it should be. We are all here, Democrats and Republicans, with the common desire to serve the people of our state well. And we do that better when we talk to each other and, more importantly, listen to each other. I have tried in the weeks leading up to today to get to know each of you, to meet your families, to dance together to Maroon 5 songs, and to have an open door to conversation and collegiality and finding common ground. As it turns out, some of you are pretty good dancers. Some of us not so much. All I'm suggesting is I don't think we spend enough time getting to know one another as people before we get to know one another as political opponents. My first week here, Senator Sue Rezin stopped by the governor's office to introduce herself. I invited her to sit with me so that I could learn about her district, and we talked about how we can attract more business to Northern Illinois. I found out a little bit more about Sue. She's a mom of 4, runs a real estate business with her husband, and started volunteering for the Make-A-Wish Foundation 30 years ago when she was first starting her family because it offered her a flexible schedule. I gotta say, I'm not sure how a mom of 4 finds any flexibility in her schedule, but I'm impressed with the tremendous generosity of spirit that she looked for the opportunity to give her time to those in need when she must have barely had any time for herself. I will not soon forget, even when we inevitably disagree, that Senator Rezin extended a hand in friendship to me on my very first few days on the job. Sue makes no bones about being a conservative, and I'm not shy to say that I'm a Democrat. But I know we will get more done for Illinois by listening to each other, which we will do with respect and civility. It is with the knowledge that people with true generosity of spirit occupy both sides of the aisle here in Springfield that I set out on the task of providing a new direction for our state. This is not the work of just 1 year. Real fiscal stability requires a long-term commitment to paying down debt, investing in critical infrastructure, and stabilizing our pension system. It also requires a recognition that to lower costs and increase revenue over the long term, we must make investments in education, in livable wages, innovative human service programs, and job training. We must stop slashing programs that build future prosperity. If we cut skills training and college affordability, we curb near-term economic growth. We lower our prospects for future revenue, and we drive businesses away. If we don't fund inexpensive gun violence prevention programs, we will see more tragedy and higher public safety expenditures. If we don't have strong social service programs that assist families dealing with a loved one's mental health crisis, then we increase a family's suffering and increase the potential future financial burden on the state. In the past, it has been the practice of too many politicians to be short-sighted about slashing costs and then to bemoan the state of the state when those cuts have long-term consequences on our economy. So let's not hollow out vital government services anymore. Let's make sure that we're focused on truly managing and measuring the real results of state programs. Taxpayers deserve to know that their dollars are being spent wisely. Programs that don't work need to be eliminated, and we need to explore new ways to address old problems. Efficiently saving tax dollars, though, isn't enough to lift Illinois out of our fiscal mess. We must also grow jobs. We can do that by fostering a business environment in Illinois that will attract talent and entrepreneurs from all over the country. We need to continue to grow our position as a top-tier startup and technology ecosystem, and we're doing that in this budget with new investments and by reprioritizing dollars within the departments of our state government. We're a big state with real infrastructure and transportation options, world-class logistics companies, and some of the busiest distribution centers in the nation. We must be prepared to make a big investment in our transportation and infrastructure with the passage of a capital bill that will be introduced in this legislative session. We can also grow our economy and make it more inclusive by taking advantage of the talent among the diverse people of our state. That's why we must promote the development of sustained wealth in Black and brown communities by being purposeful about increasing the number of minority-owned businesses eligible for state procurement opportunities, and by attracting private capital to build out new businesses and jobs in opportunity zones. And I want downstate Republicans and Democrats to work together with me on a downstate revitalization plan to encourage the creation of new businesses and jobs and foster the growth of existing ones in struggling communities so they can thrive. To get to fiscal stability and eliminate our structural deficit, there's no quick fix. It took decades to get us into this mess. It will take at least several years to get us out of it. We must therefore embrace a multi-year approach with fair principles and smart investments in our people. Our state does well when our people do well. I want to be clear about this. This fiscal year 2020 budget is balanced, but that's not enough. This is only year one of a multi-year endeavor. And very importantly, it's built on the state's current regressive tax structure that I do not favor, and that puts the greatest burden on working families. Not only is our tax system unfair, it's also inadequate to solve our long-term financial challenges. It's time for a change. Workers deserve an income tax cut and a property tax break. A fair tax system will allow us to eliminate the structural deficit that has plagued our state for nearly 2 decades. There's unanimous agreement in this room that if we want to solve our state's fiscal woes, we cannot continue on the path that we're on. There's a structural deficit today of over $3 billion per year that, if left unaddressed, will continue to grow. There's a backlog of unpaid bills and debts associated with it that exceeds $15 billion. In addition, there's a built-in multi-billion-dollar deficit of funding for schools and universities and human services that most families rely upon. For the sake of argument, though, let's agree that there's at least a need to address the structural deficit with enough to pay off the backlog over several years. We're talking about billions of dollars each year to fill the hole in our future budgets. There are, in essence, three alternative options for fixing this problem. First, we could choose only to cut state government spending and raise no revenue. To do that, we have to recognize that out of this year's $39 billion budget, approximately $20 billion is required payments on our debt, on our pensions, on our court-ordered obligations, or federally protected programs. That leaves approximately $19 billion. That's the money that we spend educating our children, running our colleges and universities, keeping our streets safe, preserving our natural resources, getting people to and from work efficiently, and caring for our veterans. We'll call that discretionary spending. To balance the budget by simply cutting government, we would have to reduce discretionary spending on all these direct services that our jobs, families, and businesses rely on by approximately 15%. That's 15% fewer state police, 15% fewer students going to college, 15% fewer working parents receiving child care assistance, and 15% less money for your local schools, which likely also means that local property taxes will increase. I should point out that this option was tried in the prior administration, and it failed, because nearly no one thinks it's a good idea to force our most talented kids to leave the state by diminishing Illinois' colleges and universities, drive families away by defunding local schools, make our communities less safe by reducing public safety, and increase poverty by cutting badly needed human services. Our second option is to raise revenue with our current regressive flat income tax system and impose more flat taxes, which fall disproportionately on the working poor and the middle class. This option could require imposing sales taxes on services, implementing a retirement tax, or raising the income tax overall by around 20%, or all of the above. For a family earning $100,000, that means paying almost $1,000 more in income taxes. And their property taxes will continue their upward march as they always have. Our third option is to reject imposing additional income, retirement, and sales taxes on the middle class and instead enact a fair income tax. This would lift some of the tax burden off of middle-income earners and instead ask the wealthiest to pay a little bit more. Just for clarity, fair tax is what 3/4 of states with income taxes have. We can accomplish this in Illinois with a more competitive rate structure than Wisconsin and Iowa, both of which are outpacing Illinois in job creation and economic growth. We can also implement a fair tax system that lowers our metropolitan that is lower than our metropolitan competitors on the East and West coasts. Make no bones about it. I choose to stand up for working families and will lead the charge to finally enact a fair tax system in Illinois. Ultimately, our chief responsibility to the people of Illinois is to set this state on a path to sustainable growth with an income tax system that is fair. It is not fair that I pay the same tax rate as a teacher, a child care worker, a police officer, or a nurse. And efforts to simply increase the income tax rate across the board fuels further income inequality and kicks the can down the road for our children and grandchildren to solve our ongoing budget issues. The state needs a fair tax, and I am going to be relentless in pursuing one over the next 2 years. My office intends to immediately begin negotiations over fair tax rates with leaders from the House and the Senate. Conversations and debate about rate structures and how much revenue we need to raise are appropriate. I expect different opinions and viewpoints over the best way to achieve an equitable tax system, and I sincerely welcome that conversation. I've already asked a few legislators who oppose the fair tax to offer their best ideas to improve it, and I'm confident that they will come to the table in good faith. What is not appropriate is a small collection of the wealthiest people thinking that they should drown out millions of lower and middle-income Illinoisans unfairly burdened by the current flat tax system. Now, I understand that I'm an unlikely proponent for this much-needed change. But perhaps the fact that the heaviest burdens would fall on taxpayers like myself under a new fair tax system will convince many of you that I'm proposing this path forward because I truly believe this is what is best for Illinois. To fix our state's problems, we need fundamental tax reform. There's no hiding from it, there's no running from it, there's no lying about it. I choose a fair tax system to get us out of this mess. Now, it will take 18 months to get done, but it's worth the wait so that we can save working families hundreds or thousands of dollars per year. A fair tax will change the arc of Illinois' finances forever. Until then, this proposed budget serves as a bridge to a stable fiscal future, which is why I am proposing a fiscal year 2020 budget with reprioritized and controlled spending that targets increases in 3 key areas that will help our state thrive and grow: education, health and human services, and public safety. Investments in people that I believe will pay dividends down the road. This is a constrained budget, more austere than I would like, but I think it's important that we be disciplined and focused over the next few years to pay down our bill backlog and the debt left over from prior administrations. The responsible course of action is to embrace some near-term reasonable and realistic new revenue, which will bring in an estimated $1.1 billion in total. Let's begin with this. By legalizing and regulating adult use cannabis in this legislative session, we will create jobs and bring in $170 million in licensing and other fees in this fiscal year 2020. I have noted many times that I don't view this issue through a purely financial lens. I think we should take this action for our state because of the beneficial criminal and social justice implications and the jobs that it will create. And let's be honest, like it or not, cannabis is readily available right now. I would rather that this state tax it and regulate it than deny the reality of its use and accessibility. This budget also includes the legalization and taxation of sports betting. Expansion of gambling is a perennial effort in this state, and often these proposals get bogged down in regional disputes and a Christmas tree approach. But in those instances, we were talking about adding more riverboats or adding into other regions. Sports betting is different. This is a new market created by a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision. Every day that we argue about who's in and who's out is money that goes to other states and to the black market. I'm calling on the legislature to take this up immediately so that Illinois can realize hundreds of millions of dollars, create new jobs, and bring sports betting into a regulated environment that will protect citizens from bad actors. If we do it this year and become the first state in the Midwest to move on this initiative, we can realize more than $200 million from sports betting fees and taxes in FY 2020. I'm also proposing that Illinois enact a tax on insurance companies, specifically a managed care organization assessment to help cover the costs of the state's Medicaid program, something that Leader Greg Harris has championed for many years and that has been enacted in other states. This would be structured to generate approximately $390 million in revenue to cover a portion of the state's Medicaid costs. This would be a smart way to increase our federal match. Bringing efficiencies to state government in addition to these new revenues is not enough for Illinois to reach firm fiscal footing. We must address our pension liabilities. Throughout my campaign, I said that we must pay the pensions that are owed, and the Supreme Court has ruled that. And therefore, that is what we must do. So I am proposing a responsible approach to our pensions that does not crowd out all the other investments we must make so that Illinois is a state that thrives. 25 years ago, when the pension payment schedule was put in place, the well-intentioned architects predicted that in fiscal year 2020, we would spend $4.9 billion on pensions. Instead, the bill today is $9.1 billion, nearly double. This must not continue. We must put the system on a more sustainable path, one that preserves pensions for the retirees that earned them, and at the same time allows us to grow our economy and grow our way out of the pension liability. And last week, my administration put forward a 5-point program to do just that. We will dedicate a portion of the new fair income tax, in other words, hundreds of millions of dollars, to the pension system, over and above the required pension payments. We will infuse new assets into the system up front. We will manage our debt through a small-scale pension bond used entirely for reducing our liability. We will make the optional retiree buyout program permanent, and we will smooth the pension ramp by modestly extending it. This approach is not one that can be looked at as a menu from which to pick one and discard the rest. There's no room for that anymore. We must attack our pension liability from many angles all at once. And we must be consistent and persistent in this battle. Some will criticize this approach. There are those who will say that retirees should lose the benefits that they earned. The Supreme Court has made it clear that that is illegal. There are others who would raise taxes on middle-class families today. I say middle-class families have paid enough. I promised to be honest about our challenges and solutions. This is the most responsible, sustainable, and balanced approach to dealing with a problem that was decades in the making and that will take years to solve. Ultimately, the fair tax must be part of the long-term solution to our pensions. There are many education, healthcare, and job creation initiatives that I think are well worth funding, and many opportunities for investments across the state that I talked about during my campaign. But state government today can only do so much, and without a commitment to reaching firm fiscal ground, we will soon be able to do even less. My highest priorities are stabilizing state government, growing our economy, and protecting working families. For our fiscal and economic health, we must start with a sustained effort to restore and improve our education system. I've been advocating for large investments in early childhood education for decades, long before I became governor. Real focus on the learning that happens from birth to 5 can determine the entire arc of a person's life. Investing in early childhood is the single most important education policy decision government can make, and it has proven to provide a significant return on investment. That's why I'm proposing funding the Early Childhood Block Grant at $594 million, an increase of $100 million from fiscal 2019. It will allow us to begin the march toward universal preschool so that every child in Illinois will have a real opportunity to succeed. I've also focused on reversing the damage done to higher education by the budget impasse. College affordability is a paramount investment in near-term economic growth for our state. So I've proposed a 5% increase for public universities and community colleges, as well as an increase in the monetary award program by $50 million to help more than 15,000 more low and moderate income students attend college next year. And I intend to do more every year as we can. I'm also proposing $35 million for the second-year costs of the Aim High Merit Scholarship Program for high-achieving students so that we can keep our best and brightest here in Illinois. Now, on a smaller scale, I'm consistently looking to maintain or increase funding for programs that have an outsized benefit to the economy for traditionally neglected communities. Along those lines, this budget includes funding for the Advanced Placement Low-Income Test Fee Waiver. The $94 that it costs to take an AP history exam is a huge burden for a low-income family. We must be ever mindful of how we as a society inadvertently perpetuate a cycle of poverty and the ways, both large and small, that we can help people find a way out. In my inaugural address, I said that I would not balance the budget on the backs of the starving, the sick, and the suffering. And I keep that promise today by beginning to rebuild health and human services. We increase the income eligibility threshold in the Child Care Assistance Program, which will give quality care to approximately 10,000 more children. We provide funding to open the new 200-bed Chicago Veterans Home, long delayed by the budget impasse. We will be able to hire an additional 126 direct service staff for DCFS to protect children. We will provide funding to help investigate cases of kids' exposure to lead. This is important because we've raised our standards in Illinois to be more aggressive. This budget adds funds for community-based violence interruption, homelessness prevention, behavioral health, mental health, addiction, dementia, and Alzheimer's. But this is less than what I would like to do. But it is what we can afford to do in year one of our recovery. As another part of my plan to strengthen working families, we're giving 1.4 million Illinoisans a raise. Our country is engaged in a serious conversation about income inequality right now. I think that's long overdue. There was a time where we operated with a general philosophy that workers should be able to afford the goods and services that they help produce. That's not some outdated notion. That's fundamentally American. Many of you asked me why I made passing a $15 minimum wage an immediate priority given all the challenges that our state faces right now. The current minimum wage is $8.25 an hour, which means even if you're working full-time every week out of the year, you're making $17,000 a year. You can't send your kids to college on $17,000 a year. You can't afford a single health emergency or pay for any of the things that might prevent a health emergency. You can't sustain child care on $17,000 a year, and you can't save for retirement. A flat tire or a worn car battery is a genuine fiscal emergency that might also threaten your job. And one paycheck is often the only firewall against homelessness. The current minimum wage is a lifetime sentence to poverty. Whether you live in Chicago or Cairo, I find that unacceptable. And I worked with the appropriate amount of haste to change it. When your house is burning down, you don't wait for the rain to put out the fire. I said that I would put Springfield back on the side of working families, and I meant it. Finally, we will do more to keep our neighbors safe in the state of Illinois. This begins with making sure the Illinois State Police can be rebuilt, with 2 new cadet classes to replenish their dwindling ranks. We will pay for the gun dealer licensing law that I was proud to sign during my first week in office to take a reasonable step to end the scourge of gun violence in too many of our neighborhoods. We will take a more rigorous approach to getting guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them in the first place. I'm committed to advocating for common sense gun laws, and I'm committed to making sure that we are implementing the laws we already have on the books more effectively. These investments have taken on an even greater importance since the massacre in Aurora, which serves as a poignant and painful reminder of the work that still remains. Every governor deals with their share of trials, tumult, and tribulations. I mentioned at the beginning of this speech that Henry Horner took office in 1933 at the start of the worst decade of economic decline in U.S. history. Horner was good friends with Carl Sandburg. They shared a love of all things related to President Lincoln. In the later years of his life, Sandburg granted an interview about his friend, Governor Horner, in which he said, "Horner was the real goods. He got to high places without selling his soul." Indeed, despite all the economic troubles the state faced during the Great Depression, Horner still managed to increase school funding, institute unemployment insurance and pensions for older Illinoisans, create building programs for state institutions, and improve public health services. He understood that prosperity doesn't trickle down, it trickles up. When we lift up those who have the least, our boats all rise together. Horner was a fundamentally optimistic man. He approached his job as governor with a hopeful heart, and he never let that hope diminish under the uncommon burdens of being head of state. He knew what I know, that the state of our state has always been strong because of the values of our people, not the value of our coffers. Horner once said, "The only way to carry out any great purpose is not on your shoulders, but in your heart. Carry it on your backs, and it may wear you down. Carry it in your hearts, and it will lift you up." Thus, the heart strengthens the purpose, and the purpose gives poise and inspiration to the will. Like you, I carry the burdens of this state in my heart, and despite the heavy load, it lifts me up every day. I share my purpose with you so that it may give poise and inspiration to our collective will, because I know the road ahead is hard, but I think it's about time we all walk it together. Thank you.
Pritzker wrapping up about a 35-40-minute combined State of the State and budget message here at the Illinois State Capitol in the House chambers. Welcome back to Illinois Lawmakers live coverage of the budget speech and State of the State. I'm Jak Tichenor along with Rich Miller of Capitol Facts and Amanda Vinicky of Chicago Tonight. A standing ovation both sides of the aisle at the conclusion of the governor's speech. Any surprises in the speech, or have we pretty much known for a few days what we were going to be hearing?
Yeah, the only thing is I think we're going to have to go through the budget itself to find out where the cuts were made. Because if there are any cuts in his proposed budget, he didn't talk about them today. We were told we were going to see an austere proposal and combined with, another proposal that wouldn't be so austere. But I didn't hear, he said the word austere one time, but I didn't hear anything about where the cuts were. So we're going to have to do the work of going through the budget.
Right, he said it was going to be more austere than he would have liked. He wanted to spend more, but let's be clear, this budget does in fact give more money to granted things that you've heard a lot from human service providers, from education groups saying that they need. K-12 higher education, early childhood. Also, of course, he did mention the minimum wage law that he just signed. That, of course, is going to be an expense for state government as well. And he had promised that education, human service providers, he was going to provide enough extra money that they wouldn't have to ostensibly eat it and make cuts of their own.
He did kind of hint a little bit about what would happen if you just went with the revenues you had. $20 billion of the $39 billion budget's already spoken for because of pension payments, debt service, so on and so forth.
Right.
You'd have to cut things at least 15%, and no one would want to live in a world like that, or that's the scenario he's laying out.
Right, but then he didn't talk about that anymore. I mean, this was a budget address almost of someone who had money to spend.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. Now, he proposed some tax hikes, some things I'd written about for subscribers, this thing on managed care, a tax on managed care, which they have in kind of Michigan, sort of. They got rid of part of it and reimposed it back. And some of the,
legalizing pot, which he's talked about
Right.
for a while, and then taxing that sports betting as well.
right. So there's some money there, here and there.
1.1
plus-
billion, I believe, is what he pegged for it.
And then,
But-
exactly, plus he's got another $800 million that he gains from shorting the pension funds, which he calls a re-amortization. But if Judy Bartolomeo were still alive today, she'd be screaming about how he's shorting the funds.
And he basically said that this isn't a one. You can't remove items from this menu. It's not a la carte. It's all. This whole budget proposal is one big thing.
And particularly that pension menu, he has a 5-point plan to, as he put it, attack pensions. What he's really wanting is not to crowd out spending so that he can keep these campaign pledges and all the other spending while not having to pay the full pension payment. And that is something that he says, hey, look, we have these other 4 points. That's not all that we're doing. But let me be clear, if it was any other governor who had proposed that, as some have in the past, that would be seen as a pension holiday, shorting the pension funds, causing more pain for Illinois down the road. That is something that certainly ratings agencies are going to take a weary eye
And you
at.
will likely hear from Democratic leaders very little about this because they want to spend more money too.
And we will be hearing from one of those Democratic leaders
That's
in
why
just a
I said
moment.
that.
Rich Miller, thank you so much. Always good having your expertise, your insight, and your great sense of humor here on Illinois Lawmakers. Thank you very much. Amanda, it's obviously very clear that what a lot of today's speech is building toward the progressive income tax over the next 18 months, to have that on the referendum in 2020 to pay down those debts, to grow different parts of state government, to try to put the state back on a firm financial ground. He's talking about talking with the 4 legislative leaders to get them on board with trying to create a fair tax structure. That is a big lift.
Oh my gosh, is it a monster lift? And like you said, a lot of this budget is predicated on that happening. I see it as the governor already really banking both his legacy on that coming to fruition, as well as not just this budget, but future budgets. That is something that, again, would take amending the Constitution. That is something that is not going to be an easy thing to do, because there are already organizations that are trying to say that no, this is going to be tantamount to a tax increase. So that is a fight that we are kind of started during the campaign, ramping up now, but is just going to continue.
We're joined now by Illinois Senate President John Cullerton, Democrat of Chicago. Mr. President, good to have you on the program.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Your reaction to Governor Pritzker's speech today, what are your main takeaways?
I can't help but contrast it to some of the last speeches we've had in the last 4 years. The first time the Governor Rauner actually had a budget address, we met with him about a half hour beforehand. He said, oh, by the way, I'm cutting pensions by $2 billion on July 1st. And we said, based on what? He had no idea. And of course, there was a reference earlier to an effort by Senator Radonio and I to work together on a grand bargain, and he put in his budget saving $4 billion by working together. This was a specific budget with a balanced budget that was
Were
clear.
there any magic beans in this budget, though? Areas where, gosh, I need more specifics to know where we're going to have our legs underneath us?
Well, there's proposals for some revenue that need to be fleshed out, and they're kind of controversial issues. The governor talked about marijuana, about sports betting. Those are issues which bring in a little bit of money in the big picture, but the public has a lot of attention for them. But we have to work out those details. That's an example of where we have to work things through. But we've looked at it. It looks like it's a balanced budget. It tells you that if we don't do certain things, this is what the dire consequences are. Kind of a doomsday budget that we've heard in the past. But I agree with them. We have had a structural deficit. We have to deal with it.
The governor did not take up a suggestion that you have had for some years now in terms of an answer to pensions and a possible way of working around the Supreme Court and what it has mandated. What do you think of his particular
I agree with what he's doing. I would point out that, yes, the Senate passed a bill that was in the grand bargain, that came over to the House. It was not called. It did not have the support from the unions. It doesn't have the support from the governor. It wasn't debated in the election.
So is that dead?
So apparently it's just out there, and it's not going to be passed. So in the meantime, he's done this 5-point approach. He's going to sell bonds and put $2 billion into the pension fund at low enough interest rates that over 30 years you'll earn more it costs the borrowing the money. It helps the unfunded liability right away. He wants to put additional money in after he passes. We pass the graduated income tax. And so it is responsible. And then keep in mind that the ramp that we passed 25 years ago was extremely arbitrary. The first 10 to 15 years of it were actually underfunded pensions. And it abruptly ends in 2045, where one year you pay $19 billion, the next year you pay $3 billion. That's absurd. So that's
Won't it be costing Illinois more in the long run by shorting the pension now, by extending the length of the
very, very long run? Yes, it would. But at the same time, it's absurd to have a situation where one year you pay $19 billion and the next year you pay $3 billion. It's kind of like when people take a mortgage and they refinance it, they extend that mortgage, and that's exactly what we're doing here.
The bottom line to that, though, the General Assembly, the lawmakers on both sides of this building are going to have to approve those changes. How do you think the governor's proposal is going to land in the various caucuses here in the next couple of weeks?
The governor came into our caucus to talk about the minimum wage. He was very convincing. We had a number of members that had real concerns about the cost of government. He's very persuasive, and he got a mandate, and he got elected by a lot of folks who want to change. And so here's the change, and it's logical, it's not deceptive, and it's specific.
In terms of how Wall Street will look at this, I saw a report from Fitch rating company just before we went on the air. They're okay with a lot of aspects of it, but it's extending that ramp another 7 years that they have some concern with.
Well, I think that if you look at the whole thing, it points out there's 5 or 6 points to this thing. The early buyout turns out to be very successful. He wants to make that permanent. That's another example. And so also, let's face it, the graduated income tax in this proposal is really coming in line with 3/4 of the states that have an income tax. Rating agencies have to be happy with that.
Could you envision a scenario in which the General Assembly does try to bring in more revenue while that constitutional amendment, if it passes, that would raise the flat tax and then give some sort of tax credit to those that are on the lower income?
He does not want to raise the flat tax. And if you understand the timing of the graduate income tax, if it passed, it would affect the second year of his budget. So it's really just this 1 year that he has a problem with the flat tax, not providing enough money. He's provided a budget that makes up for it in this budget.
So you don't plan to pursue any sort of increase in the flat tax with that?
Well, the key is that the graduate income tax to pass. And that's something which we should vote on this year. Now, when I say pass the General Assembly so that the public can decide how they want to vote on it in 2020. But we can pass that constitutional amendment this year, and I think we should.
You think you can?
Meeting at 12:30 because Elementary Secretary Administration likes to see
what would that look like? Would you envision that just to be an open question in terms of moving to a graduated tax, or will you say this should include race?
You have to pass a constitutional amendment that allows for
graduated commerce from 122.
And then you have to, in my opinion, you have to pass the actual tax increase contingent on it being approved by the public with the rates, so people know how much of a tax break will go to what percentage of the population. This graduate income tax is going to provide a tax break for, I'm sure, at least a majority of Illinois.
Do you have a sense at this point what those brackets might be?
I do not.
That was one of the things he said had to be negotiated with the
Yes, it does. And the reason why I wasn't critical of him during the campaign for coming up with those is because it has to be negotiated. And that's what we have to do right now. We have to see how much money we need, how much money is short in this budget to determine whether or not we need more in the future. So that's to be negotiated.
I want to be clear,
we can look at other states, though. You can look at other states. I mean, the great state of Nebraska has a graduate income tax that goes as high, has a tax rate as high as almost 7%. And that's from the Ricketts family. So I think that's something we can start with right there. Let's copy the Ricketts idea of fair taxes.
When you say that you want this plan passed this year, do you mean this session or this calendar year, or when do you think is a good target?
This calendar year. No, excuse me. People in my caucus are going to want to know that this is going to be on the ballot.
So we're not talking by May when session is adjourned. You're going to deal with.
Do it before we do our budget.
In terms of some of the other specific revenue enhancement ideas he's talked about, selling the licenses for legalized marijuana. There are a number of bills to try to get to that aim, to get to that
that's
end.
really a work in progress. I just learned about that today when we met with the governor about how that structure works out. We had a good discussion with Republican leaders about that as well. And we're going to start working on it right away. There's a whole different number of models of how you can do this. It's there's half the states in the nation are going to be illegalizing sports betting, and eventually marijuana, I guess, as well. So we have to look at other states. We have to work quickly, but it can be worked out.
Is there a danger, though, as you start to try to put this thing together, that there's so many different sides coming into it, you end up in a situation like we have with casino gambling, when we tried to expand that over the years?
He specifically addressed it. He specifically addressed it.
I know he brought that up.
The governor
that's
said,
a concern.
Christmas trees, and that's you're right. That's what's happened. But we have let that happen in the General Assembly. We don't have to do that anymore. This is a specific request of the governor. It's prioritized. It's sports betting. The other issues are still out there. We can deal with those on the road.
How about, are you betting at all on passage of an infrastructure program? That is something else that the governor did talk about, but he did not pinpoint a revenue source.
Well, we did that 10 years ago. I think that I sat at the table with the other legislative leaders right after I got elected, and we worked it out. It was truly a bipartisan way. We had input from, at the time, Tom Cross and the Speaker, Senator Rodonio, and that's truly a bipartisan effort. The Republicans have made it clear that they want to help out with the capital bill, which would include revenue.
Where do you want that revenue to come from?
Well,
what is your proposal?
There's all sorts of ways, because I can't say specifically. If you're a good part of the money, it deals with roads and mass transit. So that's a fair place to start. To things related to the infrastructure of the roads.
One quick question along those lines before you go. What about restructuring the video gaming tax? There's a lot of imbalance in the way that the little guys are treated versus the big guys.
And the governor has that proposal, and I think it's something which we can work on.
Senator Cullerton, thanks so much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers. We certainly appreciate it. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So at this point, Amanda, it looks as though a lot of heavy lifting to be done in the next few weeks and months, as President Cullerton has indicated that he really wants to see that progressive income tax moved out of here by the end of May, or if possible.
Right, I do think it is interesting, because I actually interviewed Governor Pritzker the day after his election and asked, what about this notion that was talked about during the campaign trail? It seemed to at least somewhat endorse it. One of the opponents, Chris Kennedy, had very much backed, all right, we don't have to wait for a constitutional amendment. There are other ways to kind of go at getting to a graduated tax, but also bringing in more revenue for Illinois. Pritzker, again, really seeming to say no to that, pegging so much on this constitutional amendment. And wow, hearing that the president wants to move forward with it that quickly, we certainly will be waiting and watching to see what those rates are and what the plan for it is.
And one of the folks who's been in on the negotiations in recent weeks as this budget package has sort of taken shape, one of the transition team members, the new House Majority Leader here in the Illinois House of Representatives, Chicago Democrat Greg Harris. Good to have you aboard.
Nice to see you, Jack. It's nice to see you, Amanda.
Thank you. Same.
And congratulations. This is the first time you've been back as Majority Leader. Big shoes to fill with Barbara Flynn Curry's departure.
Yeah, Representative Curry led the House for so many years. It's really rather daunting and intimidating to try to do the job half as well as she did.
Well, as we dig into this, you were part of the transition team dealing with along with Deputy Governor Dan Hines, the former controller, former Senate Republican leader Christine Rodonio. How much input do you think is actually of yours is actually reflected in the document we see today?
I think we saw a lot of the suggestions of the transition committee, and I think one of the key things was in finding a long-term solution to the structural problem. And it came up many times that as we look at fixing the operating budget of the state and fixing the pension ills of the state, that has to be done concurrently. If we're going to get the credit we deserve from the bonding agencies, if we're going to be able to borrow, that we have to show progress on both those directions.
That is, of course, it's always the 800-pound gorilla in the room, because you look at as the governor pointed out quite correctly, no one back in the mid-'90s had any idea that pension payment would be as high as $9 billion. Almost, what, a quarter of the budget that we look at operationally?
Sure, and if you look at what's driven a lot of that cost, it was, again, things that when they built the ramp and they built the pension plan, they would not have foreseen. They would not have foreseen the collapse of the economy and the housing market and the stock market, where we lost billions of dollars in value in the investments of our pension system. They would not have seen the work that actuaries have done behind the scenes that adjust for the increasing longevity of people and the different retirement patterns that are, raising the costs of our system. So there's a lot of drivers there, and of course other general assemblies had taken pension holidays, and that further decreased the assets.
You don't see reamortization as taking a pension holiday, sort of a different way of describing it, but is that what it amounts to?
But you can't do any one of these things in isolation. You have to do things as a package to address the long-term problem. So just taken on its own, then you probably could make the argument it's a holiday. If you do it with other things like putting the $2 billion in up front, extending the early buyout programs, the smoothing, then it becomes a package that's workable. But again, only in context of also fixing the structural problems of the operating budget.
One of the problems, though, that as we look down the road is how much of this debt's going to be pushed further and further down the road to future generations. And we don't really have a good handle on that at this point.
Well, and this is why we have the process where the governor makes a presentation to the House and Senate, and now it's going to be up to our committees, the Pension Committee, the Revenue Committee, our Appropriations Committees, to sit down and drill into the details of what are the costs of this going to be, bring in the think tanks, the experts, the consultants, and help us evaluate.
In recent years, we have seen what ultimately becomes the budget look pretty much nothing like what a governor has introduced. Do you expect that at the end of things, Illinois will have a fiscal year 2020 spending plan that closely mirrors what Pritzker presented today?
I think you're going to see a lot of the governor's ideas and the governor's proposal in there. And I think we've already identified. You guys have just talked about where some of the disagreements are going to lie. There's going to be people who are concerned about the pension issue. There are going to be concerns about individual revenue sources. I think the Republicans will say they are just dead set against a fair tax, just on principle, and those are the areas where there's going to be discussions.
The Governor Pritzker mentioned you by name at one point about this proposal to tax insurance companies to sort of get a better handle on our Medicaid debt problem. How would that work?
Well, so we're already doing it in Illinois on the hospital industry and on nursing homes, where those providers pay a tax to the state, which is then turned around and sent to the federal government. We get a 50 to 60% federal match, and this is the key. If we can take money that is already out there and earn the federal match to the tune of $400 to $500 million, that's just more money that the feds will pay for in our healthcare system that we do not have to raise from Illinois taxpayers.
The negotiations are starting. There's the Senate starting to have hearings, House starting to have hearings on a capital bill. What should go into that? Do we have a sense of a revenue stream or revenue streams at this point?
Well, again, where do you find the money? On a capital bill, you never have a shortage of people on the floor who want to vote yes for more roads and bridges in their area, fix their schools, fix their colleges. But the tough part is
the fun part.
The ribbon cuttings are the fun part. The voting for a revenue to pay for it, that's the hard part. And there's going to have to be a conversation between Democrats and Republicans and the governor's office on how you put that whole package together. And let me just say something too. I thought it has been a very good sign the last couple of days. And ever since JB took office, the commitment to bipartisan discussions and working together to find some of the solutions on some of these hard things. A new optimism that we've not seen in this building for years and years and years, that it's going to be tough and it's going to be hard and it's going to take us a long time, but that we can get through this together.
Could you be clear for me, just because we, of course, just heard the budget, haven't really had an opportunity to pour over the dollars and cents. No. Does this cover the current estimated budget for fiscal year 2019, which Pritzker has pegged at $3.2 billion, I believe? He's presenting it as a balanced budget plan for next year. Right. Is there money to tackle the current deficit, or is that just going to be something else that sits on the books?
I think that the budget office is going to have to come up with that analysis and bring it to us. They have not yet.
when does that need to happen by? I mean, we're coasting through the fiscal year.
Well, we've also seen revenues coming in ahead of projections. As the economy has gotten better, the state's been collecting more tax dollars in both income tax and sales taxes and some others. So maybe we will not need a supplemental. I just don't know at this point. We've not had a request.
What about cuts? Are there any cuts in this budget? We didn't hear anything about that. You talked about austerity going into this thing. Are we going to see any reductions? We heard about higher education, K through 12, and early childhood getting more money.
Yeah, and again, our staff's only got the full document last night, and they worked through the night. I think you're going to see cuts in there. Some may get put back in. There may be objection, but I believe there will be some cuts in there.
Do you describe this as an austere budget, or if you're telling people about it, is it a budget that sort of keeps steady? How do you describe it?
I describe it as the first step in a really long road to restoring the fiscal stability of our state. And you guys have been down here. You know that it has taken us years and years through different governors to get in the position we're in right now. And it's going to take years to get out. There's no easy answers to this. It's not going to be a happy time for appropriators or budgeteers. We're going to have to make some tough decisions about where to get new revenue, where to get additional cuts.
Representative Greg Harris of Chicago, the new House Majority Leader, thanks for your expertise. Digging into those budget numbers here on Illinois Lawmakers. Certainly appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
Very, very good, sir. Amanda, as we're going through this, the Senate President was saying a little earlier, he's optimistic he can get this thing done as far as getting the progressive done by progressive income tax moving toward the end of May. There's all of this with the possibility of a capital bill. This is a huge amount for them to get done in a relatively short amount of time.
One could say that now is the time, however, if it's ever going to happen, to do it. I do feel as if Pritzker is still somewhat in a honeymoon period. Regardless of where you're at on the state's finances and who is at fault for that, there are certainly many people that could be on that list for many years of time. What Illinois went through the past couple of years with the impasse was something unlike any state has gone through, is supposed to go through. So I think there is a general consensus of, yes, let's work together, bipartisanship, and frankly, Democrats have the supermajorities to do it.
We're going to get the response from the grand old party now with Senate Republican leader Bill Brady of Bloomington. Welcome back to the program, sir.
Good to be with you.
Well, obviously the Democrats were pretty happy with what they heard here over the last few minutes. How does this budget message resound in the ranks of the Senate Republicans?
I think our concern would be the heavy emphasis on raising taxes and tax rates. The idea of this graduated income tax, I think philosophically we believe the better way to raise revenues through job growth and creation. When you raise taxes, you create an environment that make people skeptical. So I will say there's parts of this budget that we can be supportive and work on. And
like what?
Well, I was going to go there.
So, we've been supportive of sports betting. We're going to have it. So we've been supportive of that, how we use those resources. If there's a better way for us to maximize the federal support for our Medicaid system, we're all for that. We've worked together on those things in the past. So there are things that we want to work together. We want to work together on a capital bill. And what that revenue will be, I don't know. And not critical that the governor didn't bring that up today. This is a day for an operational budget. And he's got his platform and what he wants to do. So I was encouraged this morning when he had us into his office, Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton, Leader Durkin and I, and talked about his plan and how he wants to work together. I genuinely think he wants to work in a bipartisan format.
Was there any still leftover heartburn, though, from the way Democrats moved that minimum wage hike through over the last few days and weeks?
There really wasn't. We fundamentally just disagree on the issue. So there wasn't much I could do. I believe that if we're really going to raise wages for more people, we let the marketplace do that. When Rod Blagojevich raised the minimum wage, we lost 50,000 jobs as a direct result. So there's an opposite and equal reaction to that, and we saw that happen. I'm fearful that'll happen today, as opposed to economic opportunity by an infrastructure program that brings more jobs to Illinois and other things that the marketplace raises the wages, as opposed to now the marketplace is going to lay people off to meet government mandate.
Can you speak to the tenor of these leaders' meetings? The fact that there even was one, do you expect that this is going to be far more regular than it has been in the recent past, that this bipartisanship and less of the acrimony is going to continue?
Well, that's up to Governor Pritzker. As I said, I genuinely think he wants our input. Now, whether he can agree with what we need and we can agree with what he needs remains to be seen. But there are certain areas that we can work together. We can work together, as I said, on the right sports betting program. We can work together, I think, on a right infrastructure plan. We can work together on spending plans.
What about recreational marijuana?
You know, I've got members of my caucus that are open to it, much because they want to be at the table and make sure it's done right. But there are many of my caucus, like myself, who feel fundamentally that what we hear from law enforcement and what we hear from the medical community is harmful to our environment.
In your view, is this budget austere enough? The governor described it as such and said that he'd prefer to spend more, and yet certainly at least cuts were not emphasized. What we heard was additional spending increases, at least when it comes to higher education, when it comes to preschool, even when you probably look into the line items, human service providers and such.
Listen, there's areas where he's increasing spending that we know will be helpful. They'll create a better infrastructure in our state. The question is, do we have the resources?
Answer that question.
Yeah, maybe more of a mix. And it depends on if he can pass his tax increases. I do think many of the resources, as I said, a greater Medicaid match, sports betting. I think he will have the resources from his for his recreational marijuana. He appears to have the votes for those things. So
those are relatively small potatoes when it comes to revenue.
Well,
right?
but those three make up the biggest chunk of what he's calling for in his $1.1 billion in revenues. I personally would prefer to see this budget outline some debt reduction. And the pension system gives us some angst. We have to do what's right for the taxpayers and the people who rely on those pensions. So there's a lot of discussion that's going to have to happen.
I'm glad you brought up pensions, because that's a key linchpin to the way that this thing will work or not work. And that's a lot of lift. You're talking about extending the ramp on that thing by 7 years. That's going further than we expected to. You're talking about a $2 billion short-term bond infusion into that. You're looking at, if this progressive income tax does come about, trying to pump another $200 million into it. What gives you pause? What gives you concern as you look at this whole thing?
I think we fundamentally have to look at studies and listen to experts. What gives me concerns about borrowing is it the right time in the marketplace? I mean, a big part of that's arbitrage, right? If you borrow, invest it in the market, and the market collapses, you made a bad move. Some states have done that. That's a concern. Extending the delay without a permanent fix. I mean, I have great cause about not having a permanent plan if we're going to remanage the repayment, and to rely on revenue from a graduated income tax increase as part of that plan, I think is still fictional, in that many polls we say, even if they put it on the ballot, which I believe they will, it will not meet the constitutionally required approval. So I think we just have to wait and see.
It sounds like you're not knocking it as much as I guess I had figured that some Republicans might in terms of this pension plan.
I'm really concerned about it. Again, I'm all for a long-term solution to the pension crisis that we know we can live up to. This one is very problematic for us in terms of where we're at now. But the fact that this is a one-year kick the can down the road with $800 million gives me concern. I'd rather see a permanent fix. And the fact that he is putting and relying on something that I'm not sure the people of Illinois will embrace, that is a graduated income tax, is problematic for me as well.
Let's go back to that, Leader. He said that in his speech that he wanted to get all four legislative leaders together to have meaningful discussions about creating that progressive income tax structure. We haven't seen brackets. We don't know what those rates are. I've heard from at least one of your own caucus that, well, if it does truly impact the wealthier as opposed to low and middle income taxpayers, I might take a look at that. What kind of input do you hope to offer into that as these talks go forward?
I think we have to see the details. Both he and President Cullerton in our meeting said they weren't going to propose a constitutional amendment until they had the tax rates. Well, the real question is, does it drive people out of the state and investment out of the state and actually hurt our economy, or is it helpful? I right now weigh on the side that increasing tax rates on people hurts our economy. Now, I have in the past been for earned income tax credit expansions because I do think that we need to be very compassionate and understanding about what some of the lower income earners' challenges are.
One of the things that, going back to that whole issue about the package to reform the pension program, was an idea of moving state assets into that. Right. Because, okay, we're looking at $134 billion problem with the unfunded liabilities. One aspect of that might be selling the privatizing the state tollway system. Now, a lot of folks in downstate Illinois don't deal with that too much, but in the northern part of the state, that's a big deal.
Yeah. I hope that's not. I mean, we saw what happened when the mayor of Chicago sold the parking spaces and other things, and I don't know that that's a real solution. The toll road system seems to be appreciated as it's operating now by a lot of people. Now, might there be some revenue that could help support other things? I'm not sure, but we have to see the details. I'm very intrigued by seeing what assets they think they can put into the pension system that will provide revenue, or the sale of which would provide revenue to fund the system. So it's an intriguing proposition, but it's got to be real and meaningful.
Leader Brady, thanks so much. So really it comes down to, like we have this conversation every year, devil's in the details, right?
Well, it is, and I'm not. That's not to be critical of the governor. We just got the document today, and we'll drill through those details.
We got many months to go through it.
Let the talks begin. Leader Brady, thanks so much for your time in Illinois Lawmakers.
Thank you.
Always appreciate it,
Thanks,
sir.
Andrew.
So as we were just hearing from Leader Brady, perhaps not as much of a critical reception. We're open to ideas.
Wouldn't call it enthusiastic.
Wouldn't call it no, not enthusiastic. But by the same token, well, let's take a listen to what they have to say. And we know we disagreed on the minimum wage hike thing, and but we do believe that he's willing to talk with us in a bipartisan way.
They want to talk. I think Republicans want to be involved and be part of that discussion, have input. Then again, need to remind at every turn that, frankly, Republican votes aren't necessary. In order to do bonding, sure, to do borrowing, you do need a supermajority. Democrats have the numbers to do that without a single Republican vote, period. They may not want to, particularly as you're looking for some of these tough asks. For example, an infrastructure capital bill, you're going to better believe that Democrats are going to want to share that load with Republicans, and yet they don't have to. Speaking of Republican votes from the House of Representatives, House Republican Leader Jim Durkin of Western Springs. Great to have you back on the program,
Thanks, Jack.
sir.
Glad to be here, Amanda. Good to see you.
What's your overall take on what Governor Pritzker laid out for us today?
I think the governor did a fine job in his first speech speaking to his constituency. But what I saw at the end of the speech is that there's more spending. And as Republicans, we don't really appreciate that. That's not something we embrace. The governor's spending request is $1.1 billion on top of Governor Rauner's previous request from the last fiscal year. So we talk about the fiscal problems of the state, austerity, but when you're saying we're going to spend more from the previous year to the tune of $1.1 billion, it does make me question what the intentions of the administrations are.
And your staff are going to go through that budget book line by line. One of the things that Amanda and I didn't hear a little earlier was, where are the cuts? Are there any cuts in this thing that you can see so far? We talked about extra spending.
There was no discussion of cuts we had a meeting this morning, the 4 legislative leaders and the governor, our first leaders meeting. There was nothing regarding cuts that was discussed. It was about how we have to be able to fund more programs. I understand that, and I understand the compassionate argument on behalf of that. But to get to those funding levels, we're going to have to ask Illinoisans to dig deeper into their pockets, and I don't think they're prepared to do it based on my understanding of the state and the people in the state. This is a time in which we should not run around and say that we're going to tax our way out of our problems. I wish there would be, I would say that with this particular speech, it cries out for Republican participation in negotiations if the governor is true to his word that he wishes to work in a bipartisan manner. There is some significant divides in what he has proposed. And I'm prepared to help bridge those divides and to work in a sensible fashion. But even though they have the majority in both chambers, they can do what they want.
Where do you see those big divides? Is it merely the lack of cuts? And if so, what would you suggest? Where would he look, particularly after, as some could describe the past couple of years, as almost Illinois being on a starvation diet, whether it wanted to be or not, or at least poor budgeting de facto because there wasn't a budget during the impasse?
Look, I can't get into specifics, but I do know that each and every year there's a new constituency of people who are dependent upon the state of Illinois. And we need to revisit how we have dealt with entitlements, and we always go back to Medicaid spending. And I think that those are areas where we need to have reform. We did a great job of picking apart what we think are the problems within Medicaid, having a responsible program in place to be able to cut out fraud, waste, and abuse. And that was pulled out away from under Governor Quinn a few years ago with a third party that was doing a great job. So I would say this, I don't support the governor's position on pensions, and that's where we have a major divide. Our pension problems within the state of Illinois is our biggest problem we have. And to say that we're going to re-amortize and that we're just going to shave off about $900 million of this dedicated payment to put in the GRF sounds like days of the past. And I don't want to go down that road.
Do you think Wall Street will go along with it?
No.
Do you think this actually puts us in junk bond status for Illinois?
I don't know how that calculation works, but to suggest that we are not going to dedicate our resources towards our pension systems and shortchange them, I don't know how any economist or any of the rating agencies can suggest that this is a good policy.
What's another way forward, though? Because at the end of the day, after the Supreme Court decisions and all the things we've seen over the recent years, we owe the bill. We've got to pay it somehow.
We do. And I brought this up at the meeting also this morning. Last year, President Cullerton passed, I think within the last 2 years, passed a pension reform bill based on his consideration model, in which I introduced the identical bill with 26 House sponsors on it. The only person who was not supportive of it was the Speaker. And I believe that we need to reform our pension systems, first and foremost, and not put the 95% of the Illinoisans who are not participating in these programs on the hook. And these programs can be reformed. And you know what? That's why we have a court system. To suggest that we can't pass a bill because we're afraid of what the courts are going to do is to me embarrassing. We should go back, test the situation again. I'm confident with President Cullerton's analysis that this bill, which was supported by AFL-CIO 6 years ago, would get through the Supreme Court.
So you see Illinois waiting to get to 90% funding, which is really what the governor has proposed, is kicking the can down the road. He says he's not doing that. What about the other elements of the pension plan, the other four aspects?
Well, I think that to go out, and I think we'll have to look and see how issuing bonds on the pension with the pension obligation bond, and I'll have to work with my staff on it. I know that it's been mixed reviews by the rating agencies. That's all part of the analysis. Is this something that's going to improve the credit rating of Illinois? I know it's going to infuse more money into it, but how it affects our credit overall, to me, is very important.
This could hit close to home. What about the idea of trying to move some state assets into those funds, like privatizing perhaps the tollway system?
I think we need to exercise great caution with that in times of fiscal calamity. I know that states during the time of when we had the recession back in the late 2000s, there were states that were leasing and selling state buildings and assets, which at the end of the day was not a positive for those states. It was a quick fix. I have reservations about whatever assets that he's referring to, of having those transferred into the systems without, you've got with the tollway, you've got billions of dollars of bondholders who are, we have to work our way through that, and also the bonding documents of what the responsibilities and rights are for the bondholders and also the tollway. So I'm going to keep an open mind, but again, it's a big ask. But once you do that, you don't really realize the benefit of that asset again the rest of your life. It's a one-time hit.
Leader, the Pritzker administration made a lot out of the current deficit that it has adopted when taking over. He presented a plan for next spending year,
yes.
But he says that there's $3.2 billion missing from the current budget. Did you hear anything, or in your leaders' meeting, did Governor Pritzker address at all what he plans to do about that?
Yes. He gave us a menu of items which account for about $2.6 billion of where he would be able to attack the deficit, but leaving another $600 million without explanation. There was some brief discussion of it.
What's that menu? Yeah.
The menu is going to be the re-amortization, $800 million off the pension systems, and just shaving it off the dedicated payment. Recreational cannabis.
So that's for FY19, not FY20.
FY20, that's my understanding.
So, but that's what I'm saying. So for the FY19 current budget, there's a deficit from left over from the Rauner years, he says. What about that? Is that something that lawmakers need to hurry up and deal with?
The Democrats in the House and the Senate, it's never bothered them. When Governor Rauner first took office, he inherited a $1.5 billion off-balance budget, in which Republicans fixed about 3 months later, but the Democrats sent out-of-balance budgets to the governor year and year again, $4 billion, $7 billion. That's not a priority for them in my eyes.
So you expect that that's just going to linger on?
Yes, I do. We'll take it on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis, but there's a lot of issues that we can agree on. I think that there's probably agreement on recreational cannabis, on opening up the sports book in Illinois. There's an issue about taxation of MCOs, which is a pretty heavy tax. I'm open to it. I'm open to that.
A capital bill?
A capital bill is something that our caucus is open to. But you know what? We're not running the program. They need to bring us in. I know they will need Republican votes on capital and also other issues of that size. If they want our help, they got to include us.
Leader Durkin, we're going to end on that note. Thank you very much for being with us. We certainly appreciate your time. Amanda Vinicky, as always, from Chicago Tonight. Great having you with us.
Pleasure.
From all of us at Illinois Lawmakers, thanks for joining us. We'll be back in May with our weekly coverage here of the Illinois General Assembly. From all of us at Illinois Lawmakers, so long from Springfield.